Thank you, everyone. So first of all, I'd like to thank the Palestinian Return Centre for organising this amazing conference. The previous panels were incredible, and this panel also promises to be, because we've got a fantastic panel of speakers. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So the final panel of the conference is how we're going to discuss how we turn our knowledge, advocacy and solidarity into support of Palestinian rights, and how to end Israeli apartheid and genocide. But first of all, I just want to say a couple of words. I'll keep my comments brief because I know we've gone over time. But all of our speakers, I've told them, they have 20 minutes. They must speak for 20 minutes because we all want to hear what they have to say. They have very important things to say that I think will wrap up what we've discussed today. So international solidarity is absolutely crucial. Every single right we have in any society and every single example of the end of colonialism and state repression has only ever come through activism. And an important aspect of activism is solidarity. International solidarity with those struggling on the inside. So Palestinians on the inside in Palestine need our solidarity on the outside, not charity, not as saviours flown in. Palestinians need us to stand in solidarity with them and force our governments to end their support for Israel. So we all have a role to play. Solidarity activism comes from all levels of society. We've seen it from states like South Africa and its case at the International Court of Justice. It comes from international human rights organisations and from UN special rapporteurs. And it comes from grassroots movements and activism on the streets. Now, these groups and many more have mobilised and campaigned inside all sectors of public life, including trade unions, the churches, amongst students, professional associations and cultural institutions, and it is having an impact. Israel has officially identified the global Palestine solidarity movement as a fundamental existential threat. Israel knows that what we are doing is helping to change public opinion and mobilise people. In 2010, Israel identified its National Security Conference, the Global Palestine Solidarity Movement, as the main security threat that it faced. This is why it has been pouring millions of dollars and shekels into trying to silence Palestinians and their allies across the world. Now, Israel's allies in the West, our political rulers, our elites, what we might call the establishment, they are all involved in trying to close solidarity activism down. But it's not working. We are still here, and we are growing in numbers every day. Ahmed El-Naouk asked us not to lose hope. We cannot lose hope because Palestinians do not have this privilege. They have asked for our solidarity, and our speakers on this panel will focus on different aspects of how their advocacy is turned into solidarity actions. So as I said, each speaker has 20 minutes to speak, and I'll introduce each speaker before they speak. So our first speaker is Dr. Nadia Naser-Najjab, who's a senior lecturer in Palestine Studies and co-director of the European Centre for Palestine Studies at Exeter University. Before joining Exeter, she held positions in Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and Birzeit University in Palestine. Nadia is the author of Dialogue in Palestine, the People-to-People Diplomacy Programme, and the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, which was published in 2020. And last year, she published COVID-19 in Palestine, the settler colonial context, where she showed how Israel used the pandemic to tighten surveillance and control over Palestinians. And she's going to start off the panel by talking about the meaning of international solidarity to Palestinian anti-colonial resistance. Nadia, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mandy, for highlighting the significance of the international solidarity groups that I am going to talk about as well. I'd like first to thank the Palestine Return Center for organizing this timely conference. Haya Nachi in particular for organizing everything. To an unparalleled extent, the Palestinian national struggle has been internationalized and thereby transformed into an international concern, preoccupation, and even priority. So today, I'd like to focus on a specific part of this development, namely the role of international actors in aiding and supporting the Palestine struggle. Now, throughout the history of the Palestine question, the international impact has been negative, ranging from the 1917 Balfour Declaration on the more recent US President Trump proposal, which is effectively ethnic cleansing. All of these interventions are aligned with what Zionism seeks to achieve. However, international engagement has also made an important contribution to the Palestinian struggle. In the mid-70s, Palestinians received global support, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization was part of the Third World revolutionary groups seeking justice and freedom. This alliance with the global anti-colonial and anti-imperial struggle placed the PLO within these international movements and gained their support. In the first Intifada in 1987, the unified leadership of the Intifada, or of the uprising, recognized the international contribution to the Palestinian struggle and saluted those Jewish, progressive, democratic, and peace forces that support our national cause, and called upon them to intensify their activities in this regard. Also, in the first Intifada, international awareness and support for the Palestinian cause grew as a result of international news footage showing Israeli army brutalizing protesters, including women and children, while resisting the occupation non-violently. The uprising altered international perception of what was happening in Palestine, including Americans. The Boston-based physicians of human rights, for example, blamed Israel for an uncontrolled epidemic of violence in the West Bank and Gaza. And in May 1988, the Federal Laboratories of Pennsylvania announced it would not deliver any more gas to Israel until it received more confirmation that Israel's intent was not to use it as a weapon. However, and in order to co-opt Palestinian resistance, Oslo Peace Agreement included the people-to-people program, which developed within the wider framework of neoliberalism, peace building for the purpose of eliminating stereotypes and changing negative attitudes. The program was incapable of acknowledging any emerging reality in which Palestinian land was increasingly fragmented and its population divided under different administrative categories. After the Second Intifada, the contradiction between people-to-people framework and the wider context became even more blatant when Israel strengthened its control and domination of the occupied territory by increasing the number of closures, checkpoints, and constructing the so-called separation wall, which we call apartheid wall, restricting Palestinian movement and further refining its surveillance system. Oslo also, remember, deferred the crucial issues such as the Palestinian refugees, settlements, and Jerusalem to a later stage. Due to the apolitical nature of the people-to-people program, Palestinians became reluctant to participate in the activities. They viewed the program enables Israel to silence Palestinian narrative and suppress their resistance in the name of promoting dialogue and coexistence in isolation from everyday experience and the political reality. My experience and research show that the program was trying to give false hope that reconciliation is possible while the political reality is changing rapidly. The program's structural inability to acknowledge such realities was perceived by the Palestinian NGO network, which ultimately rejected it. And in 2000, it issued a press release that insisted on the meeting of a specific condition, most notably recognizing Palestinian right of return, and that cooperation and solidarity with Palestinians should be action-based, that aim to change the reality and challenge the colonization policies. Some Israeli peace activists responded to the Palestinian network, such as Bat Shalom, which is a feminist organization, published a letter in Al-Quds newspaper in Arabic directed to Palestinians on the 25th of March 2001, recognized Israel's responsibility in the creation of the Palestinian refugees in 1948 and committed to work on influencing the Israeli government to dismantle the apparatus of occupation and oppression. However, donors continued funding people to people, refused to engage with Palestinian concerns, as usual. In 2020, USA revived people to people under Partnership Fund for Peace Act and allocated $250 million over 5 years. International solidarity groups, however, responded to Palestinian call for action. The International Solidarity Movement, for example, which is a Palestinian-led movement established in 2001, is involved with direct action by participating in Palestinian-led demonstrations and in disrupting Israeli repressive activities. They accompany children to schools and farmers to their fields, stay with or near families whose homes are threatened with eviction or demolition or harassment by settlers. The movement seeks to, I'm looking at you just to, the movement seeks to document both Israel's ongoing violation of human rights in the occupied territory and the ongoing development of apartheid in Palestine. In its words, internationals can bear witness and return home to take to their communities about what is happening, and in doing so, give hope to Palestinians, showing that we see, we hear, and we are with you. My most recent book, COVID-19 in Palestine, refers to the role and impact of international support during the pandemic. One activist, who is the coordinator of Protection and Sumud Committee, told me that settlers and soldiers were increasingly assertive during the pandemic when international presence was reduced. He also told me that Israeli army was less likely to use tear gas when Israeli activists were present. Also, in the pandemic, in the absence of the presence of these international groups, media took on an added importance and significance, as international activists were increasingly, as I mentioned, not present, but they compensated it with social media. Of course, Israel deploys a range of tools to silence critics, especially those who seek to expose its crimes against Palestinians. And I'm sure you all remember that in March 2003, an Israeli bulldozer killed the US citizen and activist Rachel Corrie in Gaza. 1 month later, Israeli sniper shot the British activist Tom Horrendal in the head, who died 9 months later. His mother is now activist on social media for Palestine. And more recently, in September 2024, an Israeli soldier killed the Turkish-American activist Aisha Ezgi Egi in Beta village near Nablus. This did not deter activists, however. Social media plays a crucial role now in Palestinian resistance. And maybe you remember that when the Israeli army attempted to evict Palestinians from East Jerusalem's Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, activists used social media to post images and videos of Israeli brutal attack on Palestinian civilians, leading many celebrities and prominent figures to express their solidarity. In 2021, Black Lives Matter created and released a video under the title "When I See Them, I See Us," that linked its struggle against racism in the US to the Palestinian struggle for freedom. Jewish activists, including those involved in the US-based Jewish Voice for Peace, have also contributed to this growing international momentum. In responding to Israel's genocidal war on Gaza, Palestinian activists responded to Israeli hate and misinformation by using social media to expose Israeli officials' racist statement, brutal settler attacks on civilians, mainstream media bias, violation of human rights, and crimes against humanity. You may well remember how Gazan children expressed their gratitude in a video posted in English language, thanking protesters across the world. Social media material also has been used by ICJ investigation and was cited in its subsequent ruling. BDS was in substantial part a Palestinian reaction to the limitation and shortcomings of neoliberal building and peace building. BDS is gaining momentum now, in no small part during two Palestinian and international solidarity group campaigns. Settler colonial project is ongoing. It is a structure and not an event, according to Patrick Wolf, the leading scholar in the field of settler colonialism. Transfer was deeply rooted in Zionism from its inspection and is informing Israeli policies with the support of the USA. Just 2 weeks after the end of the 1967 war, which we call setback or Naksa, the Israeli cabinet met to discuss the demography of the newly acquired territory, with some ministers recommending transferring Palestinians to Arab countries, while others suggesting, so it has been in their mind for a long time, suggesting that the Strip's refugee camps should be demolished and residents moved to Sinai. Transfer in most extreme instances is becoming more prominent now. In the 27th of October, 2023, right after the events of October 7, West Bank settlers distributed leaflets in Salfit and other villages, one of them even my village, Burqa, near Nablus, which warned Palestinians, and I'm quoting, "By God, we will descend upon your head with a great catastrophe soon. You have the last chance to escape to Jordan in an organized manner," end of quote. And there is a Facebook page with maps showing people how to escape in an organized manner. 21st of January 2025, and just following the ceasefire in Gaza, which is a fragile ceasefire, by the way, about 100 Palestinians killed since the ceasefire in Gaza. Israeli army invaded Jenin, killing 10 Palestinians, injuring 3 doctors and 2 nurses. Under Operation Iron Wall, Israel expanded the military operation to include Tulkarem, Tubas, and several other refugee camps. On the same Gaza model, Israel forced thousands of residents, and I'm talking about the West Bank now, to displace, killed more than 50 Palestinians. This is besides destroying homes, targeting hospitals and infrastructures. Israel also imposed closures across the West Bank that restricted Palestinian movement, which affected economy, education, and health capacity. Since October 7, more than 800, I don't know, it's always on the rise. Every day a Palestinian killed, one, at least one. So it's more than 800 Palestinians killed in the West Bank. Now we need protests, solidarity actions that support Palestinians as they struggle against the injustice, ethnic cleansing, and transfer plan. So I think we have to intensify our activism, to put pressure on governments, to exert pressure to help Palestinians confront such plans that aim at actually just transferring them and ethnic cleansing them. Finally, according to our great Palestinian poet, Mahmoud Darwish, we Palestinians suffer from an incurable disease called hope. So Palestinians are not losing hope, especially with people like you supporting us. Yes, the reality of the situation is harsh, but we should have the will to work for and envision a future that fulfills our aspiration for freedom and justice. Palestinians are leading initiatives along with international activists to change the reality and envision a better future. I am a founding member of, for example, of the Academic Action Network for Palestine, Act for PAL, which is founded by Palestinian academics in Palestine and in exile. Our mission is to build a grassroots academic movement rooted in principles of anti-colonialism, anti-racism. We seek to collaborate with academic colleagues across borders to create a steadfast academic community that actively confronts the systematic barriers imposed by Israeli settler colonialism and apartheid on Palestinian academic institutions. As a transnational academic community, we are united in our commitment to advocate for academic freedom and autonomy while opposing all forms of injustice, racism, discrimination, gender inequality, and anti-Palestinianism. Please do visit our website, Act for PAL, to help us create educational solutions, particularly as a priority for Gaza, and to foster a global network that works alongside Palestinian scholars to revolutionize higher education and place Palestinian voices at the center of the movement. Thank you very much. Good time?
Thank you, Nadia. Nadia reminds us that when we see donors, particularly Western donors, involved in purported solidarity, it's always about trying to tie Palestinians into initiatives that means that they cannot speak out against their oppression. The fact that the Palestinian NGO network, which is the driving force behind the Palestinian boycott, divestment and sanctions movements, they're not welcomed by Western donors. Many organizations in Palestine are being forced to sign forms that they do not support BDS. So this is what the Western donors are doing. They're trying to defang Palestinian resistance in terms of through the NGO movement. But we know that international activism works, and Nadia's talked about this. So I want to pass on to our second speaker, which is Grazia Careccia, who's the Deputy Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa section and head of the Israel-Palestine team at Amnesty International. Before joining Amnesty, Grazia held positions at Diakonia International Humanitarian Law Centre and Al-Haq in Palestine. She has over 20 years' experience of researching, writing and advocating for the human rights of all people in the Middle East and North Africa. I'm sure most of us watched the unfolding drama of Amnesty expelling its Israel branch in December last year because it refused to agree with the International Secretariat's conclusion that Israel was committing a genocide in Gaza. Grazia is not going to talk about that, but she is going to talk about Amnesty's new report called You Feel Like You Are Subhuman, Israel's Genocide Against Palestinians in Gaza, and how Amnesty are going to campaign around its findings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy, for the introduction. I will go back to your point later, because we are here today to talk about the genocide in Gaza, and I want to thank the organizers for the invite and for the timely event today. It is essential that we continue to talk about what is happening in Gaza and across the occupied Palestinian territory. And I'm very honored to be here to try to unpack for you our 300-page long report. So I'll try to do my best to clarify what this historical report brings to our toolbox to continue solidarity and the work on justice and accountability. I will try to explain how we reached the conclusions of this report and what the campaign and the way forward is around this report, but more broadly speaking, around the work that Amnesty International is doing in the occupied Palestinian territory. I will start with the findings of the report, and the findings are clear, direct, there are no doubts. Israel committed and is continuing to commit genocide in Gaza against the Palestinians in Gaza. Our report focuses on a specific time frame in terms of investigations. However, the validity of our findings do remain important up until today. So while we looked at investigations of events that occurred between the 7th of October 2023 to the end of July 2024, we don't see any change in the situation on the ground to make us believe that genocide is ended. We believe that genocide is still ongoing. The report focuses on the responsibility of the State of Israel. So there was the approach that we took in order to be able to identify what the responsibilities are, also for third states, and to avoid the possibility of looking at the situation as if, the usual, it's a handful of bad apples. It's not. We know that very well. What we did and what we analyzed through our presence on the ground, we are the only international human rights organization with investigators in Gaza, and we are deeply thankful and have so much respect and every day we think about the work they've been doing for the last 16 months, despite the relentless attacks, despite being displaced several times. They've continued to work, to collect testimonies, to talk about what is happening, to share with us their stories. So this report has seen over 70 people across the International Secretariat of Amnesty International working relentlessly. And there is a reason, which I will explain later. The expertise of the regional office, so our investigators on the ground, our researchers in the OPT, and our colleagues at the EIS has been incredible. We were able to interview over 212 people, so we've collected 212 interviews. We've analyzed a massive amount of satellite imagery through our evidence lab colleagues, our military experts, our field workers on the ground collected remains of weapons, and in some cases we were able to identify them, the nationality, the country that was producing those weapons and selling them to Israel, in particular the US. We had lawyers who were tirelessly looked at every single piece of evidence and crafted the legal arguments and the legal analysis that we were able to include in this report. And we also obviously relied on external support in terms of external review of our legal arguments. It was too important to leave any detail behind, so we carefully and accurately looked at every single piece of information we collected. What we analyzed? Well, we analyzed Israel's acts and omissions in Gaza. So military attacks, but also the blockade, the impact of the denial of humanitarian aid, the blockages on the delivery and access to humanitarian aid and services for the population, but also violations against prisoners. So the cases of torture and forced disappearances. The forced displacement of the population in Gaza, 1.9 million people have been displaced in Gaza. And this is what led us to understand that the framework of IHL, of international humanitarian law, was insufficient to explain what was happening in Gaza. So we looked at the Genocide Convention, and we looked at Article 2 of the Genocide Convention and the prohibited acts. And in particular, we found that 3 out of the 5 prohibited acts under Article 2 of the Genocide Convention had been committed by Israel. Precisely killings, causing seriously bodily or mental harm, and the creation of conditions of life calculated to bring about the destruction of the group. How we reached this conclusion? Well, we reached this conclusion in a manner that is consistent with international jurisprudence. So we looked holistically at how these acts and omissions played out to bring about the destruction of the group. So not only military operations, but how also these military operations were conducted, how the policies of Israel were also intersecting with pre-existing policies like the blockade, and how these violations in Gaza were also part of a broader context. So we situated our analysis in the broader context of the ongoing system of apartheid that Israel is imposing on all Palestinians whose rights it controls, and the existence of what the International Court of Justice found to be an unlawful occupation in the occupied Palestinian territory, the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, including East Jerusalem. This holistic approach allowed us to understand the cumulative effect of what we were witnessing and the impact on the population. Therefore, we were able to prove that the intent was that of destroying the group. How did we, and we know, the lawyers in the room know very well that proving genocidal intent is extremely technical and it's extremely difficult. The test is very high. We were able to look at the acts and the omissions, and immediately the scale, speed, and seriousness of the violations, as I said, were taking us away from IHL. We understood that the overwhelming trauma that will last for generations, as well as the lifelong disabilities that Palestinians will have to live with as a result of Israel military attacks, the denial of access to medical care, well, the fact that preventable diseases have become lethal, that the spread of disease coupled with the lack of access to hygiene, food, has had devastating effects on the population, and we're seeing these days reports on how this will be impacting the population in Gaza for generations. A further element beyond the scale and seriousness of the violation and the speed was also the lack of military objectives we identified. In our report, we analyzed over 125 attacks, military attacks, aerial strikes. It is an incredibly difficult exercise because not only we collect testimonies from victims, survivors, experts, including humanitarian staff on the ground, medical health workers and medical staff in Gaza, but also we triangulate every single information we collect. And we were able to fully, from A to Z, document 15 strikes in which no military objectives were identified. And similarly, in a number of other cases, we didn't reach the final assessment, but we were up to 70% sure that equally no military objectives were found. How we do this is also through triangulating information with local sources, official records, social media communication, and then when we say that there is no military objective, we can say it very confidently. Also, we did submit the findings of our reports, of our investigations, of each individual investigations to the Israeli authorities to hear from them what their side of the story was. We still have to receive a response. And we did this also with the final report. We gave them the opportunity to prove us wrong. They didn't. What we did as well was also to look at other incidents in which across the Gaza Strip in Israeli military operation, we found in some cases the presence of military targets. So we found and we condemned the co-location of military objects or targets in proximity of civilians and civilian installations in Gaza. However, even in those cases, from the IHL-only analysis, we found that the lack of precautions and the modalities of these attacks still render those attacks unlawful. The use of 900-kilo bombs, 200 pounds, I'm told, 2,000 pounds, sorry, has a disproportionate impact in particular on children. And there was no need. The times of those attacks, most of them carried out between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., when obviously people were sleeping in their beds, is a further indication that these attacks were unlawful. But not only, we also looked at other long-term impact types of military operations. We found that in many circumstances, also in which Israel had full control of areas, so these areas were fully under the control of the Israeli military, yet destruction was wanton and widespread. In particular, in areas like the agricultural land along the buffer zone on the eastern side of the Gaza Strip, which is essential for the survival of the civilian population, of the population in Gaza, as it is, essential for agriculture and for business, for the economy. Further, the destruction of cultural and heritage sites, the speakers before me have already spoken at a great length about it, in particular universities, and yet also in these cases there were no military needs, no military objectives pursued in these operations. Similarly, what is the military objective of denying civilians access to humanitarian aid? I think the answer is pretty easy, so I'm not giving it to you. But obviously, genocidal intent needs to be proven in terms of the intent to destroy the group. So these are just the facts. But what is behind these facts? Behind these facts is the statements that had been issued and continue to be issued by relevant Israeli policymakers from the high-level government members, the prime minister included, and the military officials. So I will not go at a great length because I don't think it's a good idea to give space to what they say, but the racist and dehumanizing language in which no civilians are in Gaza, there are no civilians in Gaza, nobody is uninvolved, the call for depriving all Palestinians in Gaza from any access to water, food, medicines, as a punishment, but as a, with a desire to annihilate them, has been way too recurrent. What we did, we analyzed over 100 statements. We found 22 statements of being directly calling for genocidal acts. And how we did this was also done through the contextualization of these statements. So we looked at the language of these statements, and some of you know that many of the statements had reference to biblical language and so forth. And we took that into the context of what this language means in Israel today. And not only what the value of those words were, our analysis went further, and we looked into how these statements translated into what we were seeing on the ground, the acts and omissions. So what we've seen is that soldiers on the ground have given to these statements implementation. We've analyzed over 62 videos, photos, and materials, also on social media, shared by soldiers, in which they were openly and with a strong celebratory language, destroying, vandalizing, and Palestinian properties. We've seen all the videos in which universities were blown away, with explosives, and how the language. So we also looked at all the graffitis that have been left in Gaza and how they all call for the annihilation of Palestinians in Gaza. But a further element is also the lack of accountability. We didn't see any action by the State of Israel to address the genocidal acts committed by their soldiers or other representatives, or the language used. This in clear disregard of what the International Court of Justice has asked them to do in January 2024. So all these three elements of the statements themselves, the implementation of these statements on the ground, the lack of accountability, are the clear evidence that the only word that we can use to define what is happening is genocide. We don't, in our report, exclude that Israel was pursuing other objectives in its genocidal attacks against Palestinians in Gaza. We understand, and they've made it plenty very clear, that they intend to destroy Hamas. Well, we don't deny that there are military objectives pursued in the military activities that Israel is carrying out. However, these objectives are not alone. We've seen that there is a genocidal intent, and being the genocidal intent pursued in parallel, or being that instrumental to military objectives, doesn't deny that genocide is being committed. There is no either or. And this is also what we believe is important to remind ourselves, that it is important to look at holistically what is happening in Gaza, and what the impact is now on Palestinians and also in the future. So where are we today? Well, even if there is a ceasefire, stopping the killings is not the only way, aspect of genocide. It's the only way to end genocide. We would need to see the end of other genocidal acts to be able to say that the genocide is no longer being committed. We need to see that the deliberate infliction of conditions of life calculated to bring about the physical destruction of the population end. So we need to see the proper flow of humanitarian aid with no conditions. We need to see the flow of food, the access to medicine, the restoration of health facilities. We need to see the lifting of the unlawful restrictions on freedom of movement, ceasing the practices that lead to population transfer, the forcible transfer of civilians, as we would say, under international humanitarian law. We need to see the end of all forms of torture and ill treatment against Palestinian prisoners, some of whom are still disappeared, and some of whom have shared stories of horrendous forms of torture. So we need to see that there are also effective measures that express a change in the genocidal intent by Israel. These would include holding those responsible accountable and stopping the violations. I don't think we've seen this happening as of yet. We will keep monitoring, but until these policies, acts, and omissions in Gaza are ending, we can sadly continue to say that genocide is being committed against Palestinians in Gaza. With our report, we set a number of recommendations, and for those who have the patience, please flip through the 300 pages, don't be discouraged. We try to be as accurate and craft recommendations for different actors. Obviously, we have a clear list of asks to Israel, but we are under no illusion that they would live up to our requests, which are the requests that come from their obligations under international law. We are aware that change can only happen through international action and pressure on Israel. And this change comes from us. And this is even more challenging now with the new administration in the United States, but we're not here to be discouraged. We are here to be galvanized because change can happen. We've asked third states to live up to their legal obligations to bring an end to the genocide in Gaza, starting with respecting the requests and the indications of the International Court of Justice in the provisional measures, through diplomatic channels, through the lawful measures the international law gives us to restore respect for international norms. And in particular, what we are calling for is the arms embargo on Israel, as this is the first step and the easiest step to prevent killings and part of the creation of conditions of life and also the infliction of body and mental harm. We also think that it is important to look again, not in isolation at what is happening on the Gaza Strip, but also more broadly speaking at the existence of a system of apartheid and unlawful occupation. Therefore, we need to put more pressure on states for them to act to ensure that the implementation of the International Court of Justice advisory opinion of July 2024 is fully implemented. So we need to see the end of Israel's unlawful occupation. And again, also on these aspects, arms embargo is instrumental, is essential. Yes. It is also essential that no business as usual is allowed to continue with settlements in the occupied West Bank. We also ask states to live up to the obligations they have vis-à-vis international justice mechanisms, supporting and cooperating with the International Criminal Court instead of attacking this crucial legal instrument. And also engaging and respecting the decisions and orders of the International Court of Justice. But also to prevent any further attacks against human rights infrastructures. The Human Rights Council, special procedures, they're also part of the system of human rights protection in the Human Rights Council. So these are essential steps that we ask them to do, because what we're seeing is like a relentless attack on human rights protection, not only for Palestinians, but for us all. And also our asks extends to states to regulate and provide guidance to private actors, businesses, national business entities, to prevent them from engaging and providing any form of assistance with the commission of violations of international law in the occupied Palestinian territory. Obviously, this extends to arms trade, but also to the trade and businesses with settlements, with illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank. We also had extended our request to the United Nations Security Council. We are very clear that these bodies at the moment at a deadlock. And what we asked the UN Security Council is to adopt targeted sanctions on individuals in Israel. We know that this requires political capital, but it is an important ask, because from this ask we would hope that not only multilateral steps are taken, but there are also regional steps that can be taken and individual steps by states. Now, obviously states are our target, and we call on them. But what we really, as a global movement of over 10 million people, we campaign, we gather our resources, we mobilize our movement, and so we launched this End Gaza Genocide campaign, which we hope goes well beyond our movement. This campaign intends to put pressure on states, but also in this campaign we want to make sure that supporting Israel becomes unsustainable for states. It would become unavoidable for states to admit that Israel is committing genocide. Whether they're doing this in public statements is not relevant. We want them to act to end genocide in Gaza and to end all violations against Palestinians across the board in the occupied territory and beyond, and in apartheid. The report we produce is a tool to create further pressure on states, is a tool to enable the millions of people who have taken the streets for over 16 months, week after week, Some of them have been arrested. Some of them have lost their jobs. Some of them have built encampments, signed petitions, sent letters. Yes, we want this report to be for them a tool to use and to scream and to protest with more force and more arguments. So this is why this report was for us a collective effort as professional investigators, but first of all, as those who believe in justice and the need of change. Our accountability, our work around this report includes campaigning, advocacy, litigation. We are aligning our objectives around this and genocide and Gaza genocide campaign. Our movement has been incredible. There's been an unprecedented cohesion, collective support, kindness and hard work in developing the report, in launching the report, in making sure that nobody would not know about this report. It is for the first time, and I think our Secretary General was absolutely amazed that in meetings with sections there was nearly universal support to this report. This was not the case for the 2022 report on apartheid, which was a much more complicated process, and probably also the legal arguments were more complicated. But clearly, I think all of us were at evidence that were so clear in front of our eyes. I mean, this being a televised genocide made it impossible for people to deny it. Our sections are, and when I say our sections, I'm talking about over 70 entities across the world, are, since the 5th of December, when we launched the report, are conducting meetings with their governments. They are taking on digital and offline campaigning activities. For example, only in the first 6 weeks from the launch, we had 450,000 digital actions with over 365,000 signatures for our online petition. These actions took place across 176 countries. So there is movement, there is a lot of work that has been done. We cannot lose hope. Tens of events have been organized in 21 countries only in the first month of the launch. Stunts have been organized globally. Here in the UK, Amnesty UK organized the renaming of the streets around the embassy, the Israeli embassy, Genocide Avenue. You've inspired others across our movement, and this has been replicated in other countries. Our colleagues at the European Institution Office have projected on the building of the European Commission the hashtag of our campaign and Gaza Genocide in 27 languages. We are not spending a day without pushing for the genocide to end in Gaza. It is also, as I said earlier, like our work is holistic, and our campaign on genocide is not the only campaign. Clearly, in 2022, we launched a campaign against Israel's apartheid on all Palestinians whose rights it controls. And I'm very accurate on this expression because we are the international organization that has had the more comprehensive analysis of what apartheid is and how this is imposed on Palestinians in the occupied territory, Palestinian citizens of Israel, but also Palestinians in the diaspora, and how the right of return is a crucial element for our campaign. Therefore, the interplay between the End Gaza Genocide campaign and the End Israel's apartheid campaign is an important element for all of us to work on and to reflect. We would like for our work to become a global platform beyond our movement, to be a space for wider global campaigning, advocacy, to bring an end to Israel's violations against Palestinians. We know that we have differences, different organizations have different approaches, mandates, but we all of us have a role to play, as Mandy said. It is exactly what we need to think of. Diversity is a great asset. It allows us to access and to use different languages, access different audiences. We really need to reach wider impact and to reach wider engagement. Many people would like to take action, but they're afraid. They're afraid because of the political climate. They're afraid because of the repression against solidarity, pro-Palestinian solidarity. But we need to give them tools, and we wanted this report and our campaign to be a tool for others as well, to inspire and empower. We need this diversity, we need this cohesion at a time where the seismic attacks against international law and against international institutions are unprecedented. And the attacks against the humanitarian sector is also part of these attacks. We should not feel intimidated by these attacks. On the contrary, we should take these attacks as an further opportunity for us to come together, to join forces, to continue pursuing justice, accountability, and freedom, not only for Palestinians, but for all of us. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Grazia. International human rights organisations like Amnesty have been crucial to helping us to give the evidence and the words about how we talk about the situation in Israel and Palestine. And it gives us the tools for our solidarity action. So thank you for the work that you do. These findings and facts can be used by states and lawyers in domestic courts too. So on that point, I'll introduce the third speaker, who's attorney Mira Naseer, who is a legal officer at the International Center of Justice for Palestinians. Mira is a US attorney admitted to the New York Bar and has worked at a variety of human rights non-profit organisations in the US and UK. Prior to joining ICJP, Mira worked on accountability for gender crimes at international courts and other justice mechanisms. Mira recently, last month, wrote a piece for the investigative website, Declassified, on how ICJP tried to end the Jewish National Fund's charity status, but sadly this was unsuccessful. Mira's going to tell us about advocacy and law and how they can complement each other in global solidarity and some of ICJP's legal actions that are ongoing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Firstly, I just want to take this chance to thank the Palestinian Return Center very much for having me here today. As the chair mentioned, I'm a lawyer and I work at an organization called the International Center of Justice for Palestinians, or ICJP. ICJP is an independent organization composed of lawyers, academics, and politicians that work to promote and support Palestinian rights. We are based here in the UK, and while most of our work is conducted here, we also support legal work and litigation in a number of other jurisdictions. In my remarks today, I'm going to outline some of the ways that we have been trying to turn international advocacy calls into legal action, both in the UK, but also through international justice mechanisms. I'm also going to touch on the legal provisions that are available to us in holding individuals and entities accountable for international crimes. Some of these legal decisions have already been discussed today, but I think it is important to continue to highlight these decisions again and again because they are very powerful and how we can use them in our work. So to start with, I want to briefly outline some of the decisions by the International Court of Justice, or the ICJ, which is the UN's highest court. One of the key cases concerning Israel's attacks on Gaza is currently before this court. This case has been brought by South Africa against Israel under the Genocide Convention, and the ICJ has been asked to make a determination as to whether Israel is committing a genocide in Gaza. And as a result of that, what are Israel's legal obligations under the Genocide Convention? This case is ongoing, and we won't have a final judgment for some time. However, the ICJ in this case has already issued 3 provisional measures orders. These provisional measures orders are intended to be used similarly to interim orders in national court systems. and they are intended to provide protections where there is an imminent risk of suffering or harm while a case proceeds. There have been 3 provisional measures orders in this case between January and May of last year, 2024. The most significant points from these orders are, firstly, in January 2024, the court found that Israel's military actions in and against Gaza are plausibly genocidal. The court then ordered Israel to take all measures to prevent genocidal acts. Secondly, the court found that Israel must take all measures to ensure unhindered provision of humanitarian aid, including food, water, electricity, shelter, hygiene products, medical supplies, essentially all items necessary to sustain life. In doing this, the court has recognized the massive destruction and human suffering caused by Israel's attacks on Gaza, including famine and a complete decimation of Gaza's healthcare and medical facilities, as we heard about in the previous panel. These provisional measures orders are directly binding upon Israel as a state party to the case. But they also serve another key purpose for all other states. They put these states on notice that there is a plausible case of genocide in Gaza. For countries that are parties to the Genocide Convention, which of course the United Kingdom is, this triggers specific obligations. Under the Genocide Convention, the UK has its own obligations to prevent and to punish genocide, even where other states are the ones directly perpetrating such acts. Similarly, private actors, corporations, organizations, they are also put on notice that the world's top court has recognized that there is a plausible case of genocide in Gaza, and private actors must ensure that they are not complicit. How we use these judgments in practice to bring legal action here in the UK, I will turn to in a few moments. Next, I want to provide an overview of the ICJ's landmark advisory opinion from July of 2024, which addressed the legal consequences that arise from Israel's policies and practices in the occupied Palestinian territory. An advisory opinion from the ICJ differs from cases between states that I was just discussing previously with South Africa's case against Israel. An advisory opinion is an authoritative determination on the state of the law, and on the state of the law around a specific issue, it clarifies the law surrounding that topic. In the July 2024 advisory opinion, the ICJ made clear that Israel's continued presence in the occupied Palestinian territory, which includes the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, including Israel's military occupation and its legal settlements, are unlawful, and these must be brought to an end as rapidly as possible. Importantly, the court also found that Israel has violated the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination's prohibition on racial segregation and apartheid. The court went on to highlight a number of international crimes committed by Israel, which are deeply entrenched and entangled with Israel's illegal settlements and their expansion. These crimes include Israel's transfer of a civilian population, the forcible displacement of the Palestinian population. Similarly, the court discussed at length human rights violations that are intertwined and central to Israel's unlawful occupation, including the right to self-determination, the right to life, freedom of movement, and many other fundamental rights. Taken all of this together, this advisory opinion is the most comprehensive legal analysis of the current situation across occupied Palestine. And what the ICJ has said really just confirms and vindicates the facts on the ground that Palestinians and Palestinian rights activists have been highlighting for decades. In the advisory opinion, the ICJ went on to explain that all member states of the United Nations have a legal interest in the protection of the rights noted in the advisory opinion, and they must help to ensure the full realization of the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. This obligation, and the advisory opinion as a whole, clarifies the state of international law and the precise scope of rights and obligations that bind UN member states, including the United Kingdom. The court specified what steps member states must take in order to meet this legal obligations. And in essence, the court made clear that states' diplomatic protests are not sufficient to meet their obligations to ensure an end to Israel's unlawful occupation. States must refrain from unconditional financial, economic, military, or technological aid to Israel, and must punish such violations according to the relevant treaties to which they're part. It's important to note that the British government has had a long-standing policy that Israeli settlements in the West Bank and East Jerusalem are illegal. It's currently still considering how the UK can implement its own obligations arising from the ICJ's July 2024 advisory opinion. The final area of law I want to briefly touch on before turning to specific legal actions that our organization has taken is the developments in the international criminal law space, and specifically at the International Criminal Court, or the ICC. In November of 2024, as I'm sure many of you in the room are aware, the ICC issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, as well as for the Hamas official Mohammed Daif. With regard to the Israeli officials, the court found reasonable grounds to believe that they are responsible for a number of war crimes and crimes against humanity, including intentionally directing attacks against a civilian population as a war crime, as well as the crimes against humanities, which involve widespread destruction of civilian property and widespread attacks against the civilian population. So as a result of the issuance of the arrest warrants, under the Rome Statute, which is a statute that governs the ICC, all states that are parties to the court have an obligation to arrest and surrender to the court individuals for whom there are outstanding arrest warrants, if these individuals enter the territory of the state party. Of course, the UK has signed and ratified the Rome Statute. Importantly, the UK also has its own domestic legislation that has fully incorporated the Rome Statute into domestic UK law. This legislation is aptly named the International Criminal Court Act of 2001. And what this means is that under our own laws, the UK has a responsibility to not only cooperate with the International Criminal Court, but also to independently investigate and prosecute individuals in the UK who are suspected of committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, regardless of where these crimes take place. The International Criminal Court Act also incorporates into our domestic law provisions from the Rome Statute that make it a crime to aid, assist, or otherwise facilitate war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. This is particularly important because individuals who assist in the commission of international crimes, including through financial, material, or moral support, can also be prosecuted in the UK. So I know that was a lot of legal analysis, but I want to take all of these legal decisions and orders together, and I want to turn to how we at ICJP are utilizing these decisions in our work and our actions. Firstly, when it comes to accountability for individuals that are or have been complicit in the genocide in Gaza, ICJP have submitted several complaints to Scotland Yard here in the UK regarding the complicity of senior UK politicians, including government ministers, Israeli ministers, and private British individuals for international crimes that they are partly responsible for in Gaza. The names of the individuals are confidential, but our complaints include eyewitness accounts and photographic evidence of crimes including attacks on civilians, attacks on civilian property, including hospital and cultural property, which we have heard a lot about today, as well as evidence of the use of starvation as a method of warfare and attacks on humanitarian necessities. We have also made referrals to Scotland Yard where UK-based organizations have either been raising funds for the Israeli military for use of its actions in Gaza, or where UK organizations have facilitated the destruction of humanitarian aid or have facilitated the blocking of humanitarian aid from going into Gaza. Under the International Criminal Court Act, which I was talking about previously, and is the domestic UK legislation which incorporates the Rome Statute, Scotland Yard has a duty to investigate these claims, and where there are credible allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, the police must arrest and prosecute the named individuals. We have also been pursuing accountability for entities that are complicit in the genocide in Gaza and the unlawful occupation as a whole, including corporations. I'll go through some examples of these actions. We have supported Glan and Al-Haq's legal proceedings against the UK government for providing arms to Israel that have been used in the genocide in Gaza. Under the UK's regulatory framework governing the export of arms, weapons cannot be exported where there is a clear risk that they might be used to violate UK's legal obligations under international law or otherwise violate human rights. This legal challenge was launched prior to the ICJ and ICC's decisions that I discussed earlier. But given those decisions especially, it is clear that there's a violation of the regulatory framework that governs arms exports, and there needs to be a total and immediate arms ban. Secondly, we are also currently supporting civil litigation in the UK against BP, or British Petroleum, the UK oil and gas company, for its complicity in the genocide in Gaza. BP has provided crude oil to Israel despite well-documented allegations of war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide committed by Israel in Gaza. The legal decisions I outlined earlier provide clear notice to BP and other companies that work with the Israeli government of Israeli crimes in the occupied territory. These decisions must be considered in companies' assessments of deciding whether or not to continue engaging in business with the Israeli government. Where they do not, liability can arise. And then the last legal campaign I'll touch on is ICJP's work to ensure that British retailers and supermarkets do not import and sell products that originate in illegal Israeli settlements in the occupied Palestinian territory. We have issued legal notices to several UK supermarkets following the ICJ's advisory opinion, highlighting their own obligations to end dealings with these settlements. We also have a campaign currently targeting the UK government and pressuring them to implement legally binding guidance on British retailers that prohibits these retailers from dealing with illegal settlements. In our view, the government is required to do this under the ICJ's advisory opinion. So just to conclude, I hope I've been able to outline today how we are trying to bridge calls for international accountability into specific legal actions that challenge immunity at various levels. The legal tools we have at our disposal are oftentimes limited. And in so many ways, our legal systems in the West are designed to shield powerful actors, the government, corporations, from accountability. So we at ICJP aim to use the few powerful domestic laws that we have and the very powerful international law judgments to help fill the immunity gap. Thank you.
Thank you, Mira. One thing that really struck me when you were speaking is that the British public, 84% of the British public in an opinion poll said that they want the UK government to honour the ICC arrest warrants. So what the BDS movement has always said, pointed out to us activists in solidarity on the outside, is that the route to support their rights, we have to deal with our own elites first and our own lack of democracy that we experience in the West. So the very fact that 84% of the British population want to see the British government honour this, I think is very important to hold on to. So use that fact the next time you speak to the media or to people who try to oppose you. So our last speaker, but not least, is Nuvpreet Kalra, who is a digital content producer for the activist organisation Code Pink. Nuvpreet has a history of activism and movements to divest and decolonise, as well as anti-racist and anti-imperialist groups. Her work is really a true representation of intersectionality and how we mobilise different sectors for social justice for all oppressed groups. Now, Nadia also drew our attention to how Palestinian solidarity movement is intersectional and has gained solidarity from many other oppressed groups. Nuvpreet has recently written about the use of private military contractors in Gaza and Israel's use of AI to target and kill Palestinians. And her writings can be found on the website Common Dreams, amongst others. Now, Nuvpreet today is going to talk about Code Pink's interventions, particularly how the role of social media and activism mobilisations can be used in the West to mobilise solidarity in the imperialist core and be used as tools for unveiling Zionism and its oppression against Palestinians. So the floor is yours, Nuvpreet. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a real honor to be here today and to share the stage with these amazing people. And also thank you to the Palestinian Return Center for putting on this incredibly necessary event. I'm not sure how much I can add to everything you've all heard today, but I'm going to try and add a bit of the activist experience in raising solidarity and ground us in some of the principles of anti-colonial resistance that I think we need, particularly in Britain and the United States. So yeah, I'm here on behalf of Code Pink, which is an anti-imperialist feminist organization based in the US. And solidarity is the driving force for Code Pink. And the question of how we turn this solidarity into action is of primary importance for all of us in the belly of the beast. With Trump's presidency, the direct threats against Palestinians have drastically increased. Yet this semantic violence is often condemned and reported on more than the actual physical violence of bombs and guns made by the US's finest weapons manufacturers. Biden actually tried to ethnically cleanse Palestinians from Gaza. He sent over $50 billion in weapons to Israel and provided the impunity Israel needed to attempt to decimate Gaza. It's only because of the resistance and the steadfastness of the Palestinian people that they failed to achieve these aims. Still, Biden proposed a humanitarian corridor in October 2023. This is the exact same as Trump's Riviera of the Middle East. These are two iterations of the same violent system that is invested in the settler colonial project of Zionism, both of which require our urgent action. In trying to discuss international and intersectional solidarity, I'm going to use a framework that Fanon set out in an essay entitled French Intellectuals and Democrats and the Algerian Revolution. In this essay, he starts by expressing that it's the duty of intellectuals in the colonized countries to provide support for the colonized people struggling for liberation. Now, the point of this article is actually to expose the hypocrisy of the French intellectuals, because they saw this colonial violence as just a bout of atrocity to deal with, rather than the colonial project acting as normal. And this is a symptom I think we see today as well, is some of the solidarity offered to Palestinians is only the objection to 84,000 tons of bombs, not the occupation of the entirety of the historic Palestine from the river to the sea. So the destruction of Gaza is a settler colonial project operating as planned. It's not a violent aberration. And while the entirety of Fanon's essay on this could be analyzed in the current context, I'm going to use the framework he sets out to speak about international solidarity and what the foundations of that should be. So he says, the defense of an idea of man challenged in the Western countries, the refusal to participate institutionally in the degradation and the negation of certain values, the community of interest between working classes of the conquering country and the combined population of the conquered and dominated country, and finally, the feeling that the government must be made to respect the rights of people to self-determination. These are the principles that I believe have to be rooted in the principled international solidarity we express from the UK and the Western imperial powers to the people of Palestine. So I'm going to go through a few of these and discuss how we can put these into practice. So first, the defense of the idea of man challenged in Western countries. And this, I see, as a semantic defense of the Palestinian people from dehumanization, erasure, and eradication. And I think many people have touched on this today, and it's great because the dehumanization is the root of colonialism. And the eradication of a people is rooted in dehumanization. Now, for the settlers of Israel, this is a successful project. You see the right to rape protests, the videos of grinning settlers destroying aid trucks, of settlers on deck chairs cheering, stuffing popcorn into their mouths as they celebrate bombs dropping on Gaza. Of course, the very nature of a person living on land, of someone violently displaced, has to be one where you reject the humanity of the person that you have made a refugee. And for us in the West, this project of dehumanization is ongoing. The Prime Minister of this country, Keir Starmer, leaped to put out a statement this week about Israeli hostages killed by Israeli bombs. David Lammy yesterday said the nightmare must end. Yet neither of them have used any of this language when talking about the at least 83,000 Palestinians that have been massacred by Israel in the past 16 months, including more than 60 Palestinians who have been tortured to death in Zionist camps. And Starmer's ceasefire statement last month put this very, very clearly. He said that Israelis dying was the deadliest massacre, but innocent and only innocent Palestinians lost their lives. It's stark, but this is the only way they can justify genocide. Just yesterday, the BBC withdrew a documentary called How to Survive a War Zone, and this followed 3 children in Gaza during the genocide. Zionist lobby groups successfully got the BBC to remove this documentary, and the government's culture secretary have already written to the BBC, all because one of the children in the documentary's father was in the Gaza government as agricultural minister. To me, this is the absurd, almost incomprehensible nature of colonial dehumanization. This child is a survivor of American bombs, probably transported through British bases in Cyprus, which have destroyed his home, school, and entire world. Yet his father is the real enemy. And that means his story must be erased. We're no longer allowed to have sympathy for Abdullah, and thus he loses his humanity in the eyes of the West. And so it's up to us to humanize Palestinians, no matter what and no matter if. The second of Fanon's duties is the refusal to participate institutionally in the degradation and negation of certain values. And certainly this means boycotting institutions and companies that are part of the colonization of Palestine. The values degraded by a company like McDonald's are those of all of humanity. McDonald's, of course, donated tens of thousands of meals to Israeli occupation forces, but is also one of the few companies on Guantanamo Bay, the US torture facility occupying Cuba, only there to serve the American torturers. And Stormzy sold out, of course, with a partnership with McDonald's, and this is disturbing, but the backlash that he has received is really revealing, I think, of how many people are awake to the fact that these complicit corporations must be held to account. And there's also an emerging recognition of the connection between colonialism and capitalism, because of course they're one and the same. And through these boycotts, we are detaching ourselves from the addiction of capitalist consumption. But also this point, I think, highlights a broader refusal to normalize Zionism. And we must demand that our institutions totally cut ties with Zionism, refuse any partnerships and any inclusions of the settler colonial entity. And this must be the starting point. In the US, CodePink has engaged in a number of actions like this, which I see as the rejection of normalization on different fronts. In one instance, at Trader Joe's, the grocery store that says it has some vaguely socially progressive values, they sell some Israeli products, including feta and wine made in illegal settlements. And so by removing these off the shelf and then demanding they be removed from the store totally, this disrupts the normalization of having these products on the shelf. And similarly, when activists interrupt the closed meetings of AIPAC and other Zionist lobby groups, they intervene in this business as normal. Each of these is a rejection of normalization. When we refuse to give our money to certain companies, buy certain products, or interrupt the business as usual of institutions, we are rejecting Zionist normalization and firmly extending our solidarity. Thirdly, Fanon writes that the community of interest between the working classes of the conquering country and the combined population of the conquered and dominated country. And for this is to expose and connect the oppression of people in the colonial countries with the Palestinian people. And this is the core of the worldwide anti-colonial struggle. And when this form of solidarity is manifested, it's incredibly effective. In Oakland, in Northern California, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union have a history of refusing to unload Zim, which is an Israeli cargo ship. They successfully blocked ships from docking in 2010 and 2014, which forced the company to avoid the dock until they tried again in 2021 and they failed once more. Committed trade unionists were met with over 500 protesters and they blocked the ship from docking. The trade union solidarity with Palestine is incredibly powerful, and it's been shown time and time again with blockades of arms factories and refusal to work at Zionist events. The recognition of the shared struggle between the working class in the imperial core and the oppressed people in the colony is powerful, and it must be forged more directly. This is a pivotal connection to make, and it's why there are so many wedges placed in between the solidarity. When people struggling in this country realize that the same forces oppressing them are the ones destroying Gaza, when they reject the dehumanization of the Palestinian people as a way to deny the humanity of those they are partly oppressed of, then they realize that the power lies with them. And finally, Fanon writes that the government must be made to respect the rights of people to self-determination, which is, of course, to expose and exert pressure on our governments to recognize Palestine from the river to the sea. While this is enshrined in international law and in theory has the support of large swathes of the population, it is what the Palestinian people have been denied for more than 76 years. And we are under no illusion that in the United States, we're going to force the imperialist power to stop supporting Israel tomorrow, which would, of course, collapse the entire Zionist project. But instead, we can use disruptions and questions to representatives to unveil the barbarity of American foreign policy, crucially, as a way to expose this rampant dehumanization, which should be absurd to everyone. So you might have seen some videos of Code Pink, often wearing pink, or Medea Benjamin, who's one of the co-founders, who's an incredible force, in the halls of Congress, challenging different politicians walking down the halls or disrupting hearings. I think one of the most impactful ones have been the disruptions of Anthony Blinken, the former US Secretary of State. We call him Bloody Blinken, Secretary of Genocide. And by stopping him speaking as normal multiple times in one event, that is a disruption of business as normal. And they should never be allowed to speak, ever, without being disrupted. That's more difficult for us in this country, unfortunately. And I think a core part of why these disruptions have also been impactful has been social media. Social media and alternative news sources have permitted the dissemination of this truth and have crucially facilitated some dismantling of Zionist propaganda. Predominantly, this is because it's been the first live-stream genocide where the victims are recording and posting their own killing. And this is in part why I believe there are polls done that a majority of 18 to 24-year-olds in the UK believe Israel should not exist. And there's, of course, a connection made too, particularly for us in the UK and the US. When you see an F-35 fighter jet drop an MK-84 2,000-pound bomb, which totally destroys a multi-story building and kills everybody inside, then you realize that 15% of that fighter jet is actually made in the UK, maybe where you live, where your family live. And that 2,000-pound bomb is being displayed at an arms fair in the town that you're in. And the videos of the destruction that you just saw on your phone will then be used to market it as battle-tested. Then it is clear that these videos you're seeing are closer to you than you think. So people are seeing these politicians are mouthpieces for Israel, and then they're sending taxpayer money for death and destruction with ease, but turn around and tell you that they have to make more cuts to public services. all while you turn on your phone and you see a child pleading for this to stop. It's undeniable that there's a clear picture emerging for people. Ultimately, our solidarity is up against the solidarity that exists between imperialist powers, because it does. And this has been made incredibly clear when we challenge colonialist powers in this genocide and their support for it. When France says it won't arrest wanted war criminals like Netanyahu and Gallant in their country, when it's their obligation under the Rome Statute, not just something they can decide they want to do someday or not, but then they demand Mongolia arrest Putin in the same year, we can see the solidarity clearly laid out. And when countries collude to pass laws against countries simply applying international law like South Africa, we again see the imperialist solidarity. But the mask is off. When they choose to enact this solidarity, we get to see the nature of it. The US has sent at least $50 billion in weapons to Israel in the past 16 months, which is the most money ever sent by the power to any country in its history. There are US private mercenaries in Gaza right now, operating a checkpoint by the so-called Netzarim corridor. The UK and the UK and Germany are providing arms and diplomatic support for Israel, while violently suppressing those in solidarity with Palestine. And people are realizing, or at least they're beginning to realize, that this is a project of colonization and imperialism, despite the propaganda they've been fed. And so people are connecting the violence of imperialism in Palestine with the violence across Latin America, across Asia and Africa. And the deep solidarity that exists between places like Ireland and Palestine, South Africa, Yemen, Cuba, is a recognition that the forces oppressing me are the forces oppressing you. And so we must fight them together. And this is the sentiment that is crucial to our solidarity. And our solidarity must, of course, destroy the propaganda justifying genocide. And as a feminist organization at CoPink, we've ensured that we push back and educate on the use of atrocity propaganda, or pinkwashing, by saying Israel is the most feminist, vegan, queer-friendly place on earth. Occupation is not feminist, and genocide is not feminist, and we won't fall for it. American imperialists have always used this tactic of feigning concern for brown women to justify invasions and wars. We know that 3.4 million people, at least, died in the US war on terror, invasions and wars. And we can see the same tactics today. While lobby groups and Hasbro-funded propaganda spread different lies in order to justify billions of dollars in weapons and the images of brutality and devastation that we see, we have to be louder than it. Social media and alternative news sources have provided us some facility to push back. But how do we reach more people who are still falling for these lies? And as we know, Israel increased their propaganda funding by $150 million this year, which is a 20-fold increase. And this is great because it shows that it's not working. But we have to remain diligent in destroying these attempts to justify settler colonialism and see it as our duty in the imperial core, who this propaganda is targeted at, to oppose it from politicians, from the media, and from people funded. So to conclude, I wanted to speak a bit about a new campaign that we're launching at CoPink that is rooted in these principles of anti-imperialist international solidarity. As I briefly mentioned, the UK currently occupies 3% of Cyprus with military bases. And these have been used to facilitate the genocide in Gaza through weapons transfers, reconnaissance flights, and the transport of an unknown number of soldiers, including US Special Forces. There's been no media reporting because the UK government have sent D notices, like kill notices, but there's some more information coming out, I think, and more people are becoming aware of it. Some of it was reported because there was presence of British flights over Gaza during the massacres at Nuseirat refugee camp on the 8th of June last year, as well as when World Central Kitchen employees were killed. And so we're launching this campaign with a webinar on Wednesday, which you should all come to. But the reason we felt we needed this as like an organized campaign in both Britain, Cyprus, and the US is make a link between the decisions that are made in Whitehall that are enacted on these colonial bases in Cyprus without the knowledge of most of the British public. We know that we can show the people of Britain that they are occupying Cyprus. British people don't want that. Cypriot people don't want that. And without the bases in Cyprus, the US could not be arming Israel's genocide. Britain could not be providing the intelligence for Israel's targeted attacks, of which it gives almost half. And we can see the unity of power between Palestine solidarity groups in Britain and in Cyprus. And I see this as a significant and necessary stage in the solidarity movement. We're seeing things on other international stages as well, such as the Hague Group, put together by Progressive International. 10 countries have announced they will implement diplomatic, political, and economic policies against Israel, and crucially uphold the rulings of the ICC and the ICJ, as well as refuse to dock weapons on their ports. This is powerful solidarity with Palestine, in going up against the imperialist world system that has decided it's radical to implement international law that they wrote. These 10 countries, Belize, Bolivia, Chile, Cuba, Colombia, Honduras, Malaysia, Namibia, Senegal, and South Africa, are already subaltern in the international system. But for them to unite together like this is a testament to the world-making process of the anti-colonial movement. So, actually to conclude, going back to Fanon's words, in another essay titled Unity and Effective Solidarity Are the Conditions for African Liberation, he writes that for liberation, it must be a solidarity of fact, a solidarity of action, a solidarity concrete in men, in equipment, in money. Africa shall be free, yes, but it must get to work. It must not lose sight of its own unity. And this is, I think, where we are today. For Palestine, our solidarity must be concrete, resolute, and principled. It must be rooted in the world-making politics of humanity. The liberation of Palestine is the liberation of the world from the chains of racism, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. Western governments attempt to silence our support for anti-colonial struggle, but when they use these terror laws, they're really exposing themselves. For us in the Imperial Core, our solidarity must be one that recognizes the liberation of Palestine will come from the Palestinians. We must commit to the right of occupied people to resist by any means necessary, and our solidarity must be steadfast, unwavering in support of this anti-colonial resistance. Like Fanon said, we must get to work, and we must not lose sight of our own unity. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuvpreet. I think it's very prescient that we finished with a speaker from a feminist, anti-racist, anti-colonial movement. This is intersectional solidarity at its best. This is global Palestine.